The crowd gathers within the town square, with torches in hand and hate in their hearts. They yell and throw stones at the 3 criminals awaiting their punishment atop the gallows. The hangman has placed nooses around each of their necks and stands at the ready, waiting to pull the lever and seal their fate. Will the king grant them pardon, or will they hang for their crimes?
Yep, that's me. About to get myself strung up by a mob of angry villagers. Bet you're wondering how to get myself into this mess.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Black Magic Craft. Today we're gonna play a game of Hangman, and I'm gonna build a set of Gallows. A couple weeks ago, I made a Stackers Battlement add-on video. One of the recurring questions I got in the comment section was, how did I do the wood texture? Because I kind of glossed over it because it's a technique that I've covered multiple times on this channel, and I assumed everyone would kind of know. But I realized that there are a lot of new subscribers here, and not everyone is going to dig into the back catalog to catch up, although you should. So that made me want to do an episode focused on doing wood texture on styrofoam. And rather than just showing how to do it, I figured I would do a fun build that used some wood texturing, and I came up with doing a set of gallows because it's a wood structure and it's also something that gets requested fairly often. So without further ado, let's start building. So I took some 1/2-inch insulation foam and I ripped it down to 10mm wide strips. I then turned those strips and ripped them again at 10mm. This created 2 separate strips, one that would be used for the main timbers and one that would be used for the planks. I bet you really love that mixing of metric and imperial measurements, don't you? There are 2 distinct ways you can do wood grain on foam. One is with a wire brush. This gives you a more realistic, scale appropriate wood grain, or for a more kind of embellished comic book style, you can use a mechanical pencil to draw in some wood grain. This tends to have a much more exaggerated look. You can also combine both of these methods if you want. For this build, however, I decided to go with the more realistic wire brush technique. And a nice tip here is that the more aggressive you are with that wire brush, the more passes you do, the more exaggerated that grain is gonna look in the final product. I started this build by making the platform, and I needed a rigid surface to glue my foam planks to. So I cut a piece of chipboard at 4 inches by 8 inches, and I added some foam kind of framing underneath, and this would give me something to then glue the big timbers to on the side. Once I had that, I could start laying the planks on this, just like laying hardwood on a floor. I made sure to intentionally leave some seams in the wood, and I did it in a way that would actually make sense to what kind of implied framing would be underneath. There was an actual pattern to this. When doing wood grain on foam builds, it's important to go through after and put wood grain on any of the exposed edges or ends that didn't get it in the prep work. So here I'm texturing the sides of the first and last piece, and then I'm gonna go through with a mechanical pencil and draw in some wood grain on the end cuts of all the planks. This is going to make this build look a lot more believable. And it's important here to try and change up the direction of this grain, because if you look at a bunch of planks of wood, the wood grain is not always just going straight and perfectly perpendicular to the piece. Trees grow in circles, and that's reflected when you cut planks. I wanted some trap doors for the people to fall through on this platform, so I cut some strips of foam, and then I actually cut away parts of the planks that I had already laid so that these trap doors could be flush and not sitting on top. This isn't necessarily the easiest way to go about this, but it does provide a nice flush floor. You could definitely just put these on top if you wanted to. You could, in theory, also put them on ahead of time, then put the planks around it, but I actually think that would be more difficult. And then I started constructing the frame for this platform to sit on so that it would raise it up to the height that I wanted. And I used those bigger timbers that I had pre-made, cut a bunch of them to the appropriate lengths to make this as tall as I wanted it to be. But to construct this and make it stable, the trick with using foam, which is quite soft and pliable for this sort of thing, is to take toothpicks and impale the foam. This adds like a skeleton to it. It makes it rigid. And then you can also use the point of the toothpick to actually pin it to the next piece. So it impales the next piece, it bridges them together. That plus a little bit of glue makes this really strong. You can use PVA glue for this, and that will dry very, very strong, but it takes a long time for it to harden up and can be difficult to work with. So you may want to use hot glue. That works as well too. It's just a little bit messier. After completing the main structure, I had to build a set of stairs, and I wish I could give you some very specific detailed measurements and advice on how I made these, but honestly, I just kind of made it up as I went along. Stairs are very tricky and kind of complicated to build, and they involve a lot of trial and error, holding things up until you get the right size and angle. My biggest piece of advice when building stairs is to try to be mindful of the space between them so that you can put a mini base in between each step, making the stairs actually playable. As usual, I gave this thing a coating in my Blackmagic base coat, which is just Mod Podge and black paint to seal and harden the foam. And a lot of people get hung up on this, worried that it's going to make them lose detail in their texture work on the foam. But as you can see, this build has a lot of really fine wood grain texture from the wire brush. I'm not watering down the Mod Podge here. I use a wet brush, but I mostly just make sure that I'm really thorough not to leave any excess anywhere and just brush on a thin coating. And in the end, I preserve all of my detail. Hey guys, it's that time in the tutorial where I paint the piece. And before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about painting wood, because there is a common trend in terrain building to paint wood in a very unrealistic dark brown color. And I am very guilty of this myself, and I'm trying to change that. I tried with this piece to paint the wood in a more realistic fashion. Let's go outside and take a look at some weathered wood to see what I was referencing for the color. So this is my very old, probably 34-year-old wood fence, and as you can see, it is anything but brown. It is decidedly gray. Brown is long gone. So it's got these tones of silver. We are going to try to attempt to mimic that, maybe with a bit of brown underneath, but not dark brown. For my base color, I used this very golden sienna brown, but the trick here was that I really watered it down and put on a fairly thin coat. This meant that the black Mod Podge undercoating still showed through quite a bit and darkened up the golden color. And already just from that, it already started to make this thing look a little bit weathered. But then I needed to bring down this golden color and introduce the grays. So I took this light tan kind of color and I dry brushed over everything. This took all of the ridges and wood grain textures and it turned it a nice silvery gray color. After that, I used a blackish brown wash, and this went over everything, and this got in all the nooks and crannies and really highlighted that wood grain. It also really tinted the gray and gold colors that were remaining and made this thing look more weathered and gnarly. I needed something to make the crankshaft lever thing for the trap doors, so I dug through one of my bits boxes and I found this old lever I had made for something else. It was just a toothpick with a pellet on it, and I found this round plastic gear thing that I thought would work well. I wanted the round gear to only be halfway through this platform, so you'd only see half the circle, so I decided to use my rotary tool to cut it in half. This is a little bit sketchy because it's hard to hold on to this sort of round plastic thing, so always be safe. Safety glasses, because of course it flew wildly, which I was kind of expecting, but I was being careful and it didn't end up hurting or anything. Anyways, eventually cut through this thing in half. Then I used my rotary tool to drill a hole in it and put the lever. I needed to paint this thing up like metal, so I primed it with a black spray paint, and then I painted it out using some of the new paints that I got in that acid drop box that I reviewed. I used this Secret Weapon silver paint, and man, it was really potent. The coverage was amazing on it, far better than any of the other metallics that I had used previously, and I used some of the washes that came with it to try to weather this thing, and it came out all right. I also had to make a couple really small nooses, so I went to Walmart and I found this really fine rope that looked to be about the right scale, and I set to work trying to tie some miniature nooses. Here's the thing, I'm not a knot smith. I don't know how to tie knots, so I tried to tie these nooses. I looked at a reference. It was tough. Eventually, I managed to get the string to a point where it kind of vaguely resembled a noose, and I gave up. I got 3 that looked okay, and I just went with them. To make sure these wouldn't fall apart long term, I soaked them in PVA glue, and then I wrapped them around the main beam of the platform. I also took an extra one that I had made that didn't turn out very good, and I coiled it up on the platform to look like a spare noose, and I soaked it in some extra PVA glue, and this really locked it in place. Then I took my little lever thing for the platforms and I super glued that into place, and this thing was basically done. All that was left was to take it outside and spray it with a clear coat. And here again, I used that Krylon clear coat. I think I'm officially changed over to this stuff versus the Minwax now, because the Minwax is becoming harder and harder to find, and this stuff seems to work really well. It doesn't yellow over time like the Minwax can, and also it is a very, very matte finish, so it looks really, really good. I'm quite content with the way this thing turned out. I think it's going to be a really fun game piece to have in my collection, and I think it was a great way to demonstrate how to make wood out of foam. If you want to pick up any of the tools or supplies that I use to create these builds, you can head over to blackmagiccraft.ca, where I have my essential equipment store. I link to all the stuff that I use and recommend, and purchasing through those links gives me a small commission from Amazon that helps fund these videos. If you really love these videos that I put out every single Friday for the community, and you want to help me keep making them, the best way you can do that is by contributing on Patreon. It's the support from those people that is the main factor in allowing me to dedicate so much time to making these videos every single week. A little help goes a long way there, and I would love to have you as the newest member of the Black Magic Craft Fellowship. That's it for this episode, guys. I hope you found this video informative and enjoyable, and most of all, inspiring. Whether or not you want to build a set of Gallows for yourself is besides the point. You now know how you can make fairly realistic looking wood textures and color on styrofoam for all sorts of different terrain builds. One thing I want to talk about, this string rope. These dried very stiff and straight, and that's great, but If you do this, know that you can afterwards just kind of break them up a little bit to soften them up so that you can place these nooses on Minnie's heads. The glue is really there to hold the noose shape and lock in the knotwork. Don't be too worried. You can absolutely, soften this main bit of rope up again and you're good to go. If you like this video, hit that like button and let me know in the comments section below. Is there some other technique that I tend to gloss over that you want me to focus on more? Let me know in the comments section. If you're new to the channel and you have not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell notification dingy thingy. I got an episode every single Friday showing you how to build cool stuff for your game of tabletop role playing. That's it for this week, guys. Cheers, happy crafting.